Welcome, everybody. You are here tonight to learn about a great book and a great pair of activists. I'm Jennifer Morales from Family Values at Work, and tonight we have our founding director of Family Values at Work, Ellen Bravo, and with her, someone I fondly refer to as Mr. Ellen Bravo, Larry Miller. They are partners in life and partners in activism and have been a huge influence in my life story. We've been compatriots in many a struggle for kids, for public schools, for democracy over the years, as well as paid leave in our work at Family Values at Work. So I'm really excited to have Ellen and Larry here. I also have been able to watch the book that we're going to talk about tonight emerge over months and years. And I'm so excited that it is now in bound, published form. And we have an opportunity to talk about some of the themes, but I encourage you to get a copy of it. It should be available at your independent bookseller or bookshop.com. I could say the other place, but I'm not going to, the bad place. So please do support your independent booksellers and get a copy of Standing Up. So Ellen and Larry are here to answer some questions that I will ask, but you also are welcome to put questions in the chat. But maybe we'll start at the very beginning. Unless Larry or Ellen, do you want to say anything to start us off?
Just how glad we are to be here. Thank you so much.
Yes, this is great.
All right, excellent. So first of all, I say happy Pride, everybody. Yes. And now I'll say, let's start at the top. So the title of the book is Standing Up, Tales of Struggle. And what does that title mean?
Well, in one sense, it comes from a key chapter in the book called The Stand Up, where workers who are at a call center making airline reservations, who can't leave their desk and everything they do is monitored, including time in the bathroom, decide that they have to stand up somehow. And so for 1 minute, 60 seconds, they work with the keyboard in the crook of their elbow. They're still taking reservations, but they're on their feet and they have each other's back. And they know that nothing will ever be the same, even though they have no plan, no organization yet. They've taken this step. But the other sense of it is we wanted so much to show the moments when people understand that exploitation and oppression is not inevitable. It's not life. It can be changed, and that we are the ones who can change it, not by ourselves, but by standing together. So that's what that title means.
That's great. Okay, I said I was going to ask about themes, and I really am going to ask about themes. But first, it's really interesting to me as a solo writer to think about writing in collaboration, and especially writing in collaboration with your life partner. So I'm wondering if the two of you would like to just offer some thoughts about how did that go? A perilous path it could have been, but maybe it was all delight and rainbows. I don't know.
Actually, it was. It's been a little more difficult to organize the dispersion of the book to get it really out there. That's been a struggle. Ellen will ask me, a couple times a day, "What have you done for the book today?" But in writing, it was actually a real pleasure, because how it started out, I had written some essays, and some folks had read them and liked them, but I just wasn't happy with what would be the genre for actually putting these out in the public. And so I went to Ellen and suggested that we do fictions to give us the flexibility that we would need, and the ability to bring some of her writings, and she has been writing for years, to bring them together and develop a through line. We actually started out with 23 short stories, but our publisher said, I strongly, strongly suggest you create a through line that's very clear and that you connect them into a novel. So we describe it as a novel in stories.
One of the things we did, I'll give you an example because it was near where you live. We gave ourselves a 3-day writing retreat in a place near Viroqua, Wisconsin, on Cowboy Joe and Cowboy David's ranch. And, Larry had written these essays about experiences he had in the South in the early 70s. And then one about being a teacher in the 90s. And so we took one of those stories, and Larry, I had him on the way there just describe to me. I'd ask him, what was that person's voice like? How did they wear their clothes? Describe the factory? What were the sounds? And he did that really vividly. And then I got there, I rewrote his essay into fiction. I wrote maybe half of it. I read it to him. He loved it. He made these changes, those changes. I fixed it. I did in the next section, same process. In between, we'd go for hikes. We'd eat cake that Cowboy David made. We watched horses. And in 3 days, we had a draft of this chapter. And it was a great experience because it really drew on all the sensory detail that Larry remembered, but had never really been trained to describe in a writing down. And I was able to take that. So it was a really good process.
By the way, that weekend, which is just outside where you live in Viroqua, we didn't get a chance to see you because you and your partner were in COVID lockdown. And so we drove all the way out there, got a cabin, but one of our great pleasures is visiting you in Viroqua.
Aw, thanks. Yeah, it's been a ride. So that's great that, Ellen, you were able to take your fiction training and apply it to these really amazing life stories about workplaces, activism. Because we spend so much time in our workplaces, it's so great to have the distance of fiction to help make some of that, see maybe some of the humor in it or some of the emotion in it without us actually having to live it in person, because work is hard and workplaces are hard, as we know. So that's great. And you both have such amazing stories about bringing activism to the workplace, because it has been your life. Do you want to say anything else about why fiction was the right choice rather than just a straight memoir of a fiction-worthy couple of lives, for sure? But why fiction? Why the distance of fiction, or why the frame of fiction?
Well, one of the things that meant a lot to me was to actually fill in the stories. For example, the first story of the slowdown at Grady Hospital in Atlanta, which did happen, and the story as it's told is pretty much the timeline, but the discussion between the people are real. Later on, there are people that are, a conglomerate of personalities and people that we experience, but there it's pretty close, to what actually happened. But the daily conversations, the words that were spoken, exactly how things develop, and we wanted to go into that detail, was difficult. That was 50 years ago. So there's a lot that I don't remember about the details of my life.
The other thing that fiction helped us do, there are a couple of chapters that explore a storyline that we were inspired by, people we know, or something we imagined, but that taught lessons of things that we had experienced. Fiction allowed us to do that. So, for example, it allowed us to tell the story of somebody who, as a child, her mother was one of the people who stood up in the call center, got courage from that experience and the support from the friend at work to leave an abusive marriage. The guy she left wound up taking the kids, and she had to get them back and go start a new life. And so what was it like to be that 6-year-old girl living in very low income, having seen this abuse, having seen what her mother did, and, you know, being determined that that would never happen to her, that she would be able to have control over her life and help create change. And then she gets sucked into a corporate rat race, thinking that if she just gets high enough on the corporate totem pole, she can make change, and becomes the things she's required to do in order to succeed turn her into a really insensitive and obnoxious manager. And we see her, you know, 20 some years later in that role. And I really wanted to imagine what that would be like, what it would take to get her to change, what kind of intervention, and then how she might work with the workers she'd been so awful to change things that all of them needed, including herself, who was being subjected to horrible sexual harassment from the guy in charge. So it gave us that leeway.
Yeah, that would be a really big scope to try to capture just from your one point of view or 2 points of view. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You have said that the book is about the deliberately unheard. What does that mean to you?
There's a wonderful author named Imbolo Mbue. She wrote a book called How Beautiful We Were, and it's about an African village that's being polluted, and lives are being ruined by a multinational corporation. And she describes those villagers as the deliberately unheard. And I thought that's exactly the phrase we need. People often talk about the voiceless. Everybody has a voice. What everyone doesn't have is a megaphone. Mm-hmm. And in fact, often those who have the megaphone deliberately exclude the majority of people, and particularly the ones who are the most oppressed and exploited. And so our book, what we wanted to do was center on the very people that are usually the deliberately unheard, so that everyone could hear their voices, and show the power, the joy, as well as the hardships that they were experiencing.
Yeah, so the book becomes a little bit of that megaphone. Yeah. The workplace stories, working class stories are really very powerful, and I appreciated them as someone who grew up very working class. It's not usually the kind of thing that like the big New York publishing houses immediately go for, right? There's a certain middle class bias, I think. So it's great to have this book, this novel, celebrate just regular people standing up for what they need. The book deals very straightforwardly with race and sometimes the misunderstandings and power imbalances that happen in organizing. And in the acknowledgments, you mention the phenomenon of white organizers having some urgency to address racism, but maybe doing it in a clumsy fashion. And I don't know if you have any thoughts about that you wanted to offer, or examples from the book.
Well, again, going back to the first story of the slowdown at Grady Hospital, but then also getting into some of the other stories where we went into Nick in the book goes into factories and experiences just all types of workers. But what happens in the slowdown, Nick arrives at the hospital and the workers are organizing, and he gets the chance to participate in a situation where there are 40 African-American women, 7 African-American men actually organizing to deal with horrible working conditions and unsanitary working conditions. And what we wanted to show was Nick learning from that leadership and from that experience. So you actually had both Black men and Black women leading a struggle that was actually victorious, and doing it in a very creative way. They started with a slowdown because they couldn't get any response to the difficult conditions, and ended up, because one of the people was fired, they ended up with a work stoppage. And so one of the things we try to do in the book is show as many of the kind of tactics that workers develop in their situation and not responding alone, but actually responding in a collective way.
And one of the things I loved about those early stories of Larry's, and then we try to do elsewhere in the book as well, is show what it's like. For example, the Nick character, there's a guy who just doesn't want to talk to him, and he's kind of hurt by it. And a friend who's a neighbor and mentor, just a few years older, but very involved in Black worker organizing in Atlanta, says to him, hey, the only white people that guy knows are the ones who shut off his lights and lock up his kids. Don't take it personally. That was a really important lesson. And likewise in the stand-up, I mean, the stand-up leads to a union drive. So the chapter called The Union Makes Us Strong, there's a white worker who says, well, wait a minute, you know, we're talking about, should we talk about equal pay? There's a two-tier workforce. Most of the Black workers are in the lower tier and get lower pay for exactly the same job. And they've been making it a principle that the issue of equity is something they have to talk about when they organize. And this white woman says, well, wait, won't the white workers in that lower tier get higher pay too? And the Black worker says to her, bingo, maybe that's the point. Maybe racism hurts all of us, and that's something we have to learn. So we try to show some of those moments of recognition of what we think is a really important lesson, that we stand up against racism, not out of just solidarity for others, but understanding that not doing so strengthens the hand of the ones who oppress all of us, and that it absolutely is, you know, as Heather McGhee says in The Sum of Us, all of our interests to take this on, but we have to do it intentionally.
Yeah, I mean, racism is such a tool in maintaining inequality in our system, in our economy. It shouldn't be an aha moment, but it is, because we're so, you know, invested and trained from an early age to be invested in the system as it is. So, yeah, it's great to watch the characters come to those realizations.
So
Yeah,
one of the
ahead.
things, Jennifer, is you know, we really try to put racism, the fight against racism, misogyny, and homophobia at the center of the stories that we told, and it was very important to us. But we also show different types of workers. For example, in Dirty Tricks, AD, and that's his nickname because he was proud that he did angel dust, and was a very backward human being who was protected by the bosses in keeping his job, no matter what kind of behavior he did. So we really tried to bring in the different levels, different types of workers, you know, that you're going to see, that you're going to run into as people are organizing in the workplace. And you have to have ways of dealing with all levels of thinking and actions.
Yeah. On that point, do you feel like this is a teaching book in some way? That it's not just a really good story, because it is a great story about working people fighting the good fight, but, you know, is it something that like a union or an organizing, community organizing group could use to talk about organizing?
Absolutely. We've been encouraging that, and there are people who have said they want to do it. They want to do it in the classroom, you know, in teaching high school students. But we've had other people also say that these are excellent examples for how people should be looking at. It's a way to look at organizing and what it should look like as a lifelong experience.
Yeah, and learning lifelong too. Like the characters don't ever stop learning new things about how the world works, how organizing works, how relationships work, because it is also a love story that is very sweet. But I was thinking too that I know we're seeing this as a novel. It started out as somewhat interconnected stories, and then, you know, you started to see this other whole as you were developing the manuscript. But I can also see teachers or organizers pulling it apart and using specific episodes to illustrate, things that happen when you're trying to organize across the hierarchy in a workplace, or across racial groups, across age groups. There's a great story in there, Listen to the Children, about how kids were involved in the struggle for family leave. I almost said paid family leave. It was unpaid family leave in Wisconsin back in the 90s. Do you want to talk about the role of kids as organizers, kids as activists?
Yeah, that's one thing a lot of people have told us they love about the book, is that kids, first of all, there's so many kids in it. And somebody said you could tell a woman wrote this book because every meeting has kids and food and fun. But we wanted to show that children both are incorporated in the lives of activists and normalize what it means to be organizers, that there are people who fall in love and like to eat and like to have sex and like to work things out and celebrate and sometimes grieve and sometimes fight. And that their kids get involved. So the children in Listen to the Children, who lobbied for family leave, and this is a real story, 1988 in Wisconsin, that's how we won. They're all people whose lives have been touched by the lack of leave, or by their family having it and knowing from some other child in the hospital bed next to them what it means not to have it. And we loved that. And they were really proud of the role that they played. And there's also a chapter called We Won't Let You Pollute Our Playground, about students who organized against environmental racism in Milwaukee. That was straight out of what happened in Larry's classroom.
Yes, we did a unit on environmental racism in my classroom, and I was part of a subgroup within the school. And one day, two students come walking into the room and say, Mr. Miller, we found some pollution. You got to come and see it. And there was an oil leak from a company that took oil and put it in cans. When you buy your cans of oil to put in your car. And it was truly an environmental disaster. And they got organized. And once they saw that I was going to support them, and that the other teachers were going to, and the principal was going to support them, they took off. They did some very serious organizing. And so we try to show that in the book, that not only is it for kids to be active and participate, it's also for students to be able to lead, and they have all sorts of skills. You just have to be able to help them, bring them together and focus, and great things can happen. We did win that struggle. It today is a playground that is very, very safe and a wonderful spot for children.
That's amazing. So I didn't give Larry's introduction justice because I had to make my joke. But I do want to acknowledge his history in education, classroom teacher and school board member in the Milwaukee Public Schools, and university professor. So, he knows his classroom dynamics, and that's story about the pollution and the students organizing is really amazing. I think too, for folks who have maybe some stereotypes in mind about disaffected teenagers who, just want to listen to their music and hang out with their friends, it's really good to see the Milwaukee kids I know, really getting involved in defending their own neighborhood and protecting their own lives and the lives of their younger siblings. I know one of the characters says that, that they need to make sure that this place is safe when their little siblings come running over to play on the swings or whatever. They don't want them running through toxic sludge, right? So yeah, it's just a beautiful example of young people's agency. And again, something that often doesn't get shown, especially in books that are targeted toward adult readers. With the rise of young adult fiction, we get to see more of that, or really strong middle grade fiction. We're starting to see more about young people really taking their agency seriously and making change in the world. But for a long time, that wasn't the case. Kids were things that, people that things happened to, not people who made change in the world, at least as you saw them through books.
It was so great when we did a book talk in Oakland. Our younger son lives there and was at the talk. And he was the model for Ellie, the younger child of Nick and Sophie, who gets hit by a car and who then becomes 2 years later part of these kids that fight for family leave. And someone there asked him, well, what's your memory of that? And what did it mean in your life? He said, at the time, we were really excited that we were on television. But, looking back on it, it's one of the proudest things in my life. We really made a difference. They heard us. We made them hear us. And that's why it won. And, he was really proud of that. And yeah, that was a great moment.
That's great that your fiction life and your parenting life are crashing together in such a good way.
Exactly.
Yeah, in terms of other stories that happen in here, this is a story also about Nick and Sophie's relationship as it starts and then as it evolves, marriage and kids and balancing careers. And I'm really curious to know how that felt to fictionalize your relationship on the page. And I don't know, any other details you want to tell us about what that was like?
I can start. The chapter where they meet, chapter 5, is probably the most autobiographical thing I've written, except for the backstory of Sophia. We made that up, but otherwise, and we had this experience where I said, Larry, try to remember, how much of what happened that day, that first date, do you remember? And it turned out he remembered everything. He remembered what he wore. He remembered scrubbing the coal dust from his eyes and his fingernails because some woman that he went out with had been disgusted by seeing it and left him on the date. And he remembered going and scouting the club that we were going to go to because he didn't want to look like he'd never been there before and he wanted to know where to park. And that was so endearing and fun to write that chapter together and how the memories meshed. And I think, lots of people, we did this during the pandemic. Lots of people, by the end of the lockdown anyway, were ready to do anything but be with their mate for one more minute. And we felt just the opposite, that this really, brought us closer. It was a really positive experience, including writing about fights and how we handle conflict and things that were hard when they happened and, really complicated with the kids. But it was a great process uncovering them.
Do you have any comments, Mr. Miller?
Well, I'm trying to be Nick in my real life. But we were very clear. We're not going to idealize, Ellen and I, if you try to pay a mortgage or pay a rent and raise children, you're going to have differences. I mean, it's just the reality of how difficult it is to do things. So we really took the attitude that we wanted to portray it in a realistic way. But the great thing about Ellen and myself is on our political discussions, at first we had differences, as we first were dating and going out, there were differences. I learned a lot. But for the last 44 and a half years, we politically, we really do come together and end up at the same place. And so it's having that I having her back, her having my back. It's been a great ride. It has been amazing.
Our oldest son said there's a lot of chapters where Nick is in the kitchen cooking. And good job, hon.
No, he calls it at the end of a number of chapters. That they had cooking in the kitchen, which I do most of the cooking, and which is a part of our division of labor, and it's a very important part. So yeah, our sons do a good job of laughing at us for doing what we think is great stuff.
Well, you actually anticipated my next question, which was, this book takes place from the 70s up till nearly contemporary moment. And so, the roles of men in the house have changed over that time, I believe for the better, although, sometimes more in aspiration than in actual fact, depending on the household. But if Nick and Sophie's household is accurate, it sounds like it evolved to be a very egalitarian situation. I'm wondering if you, either as your fictional selves or your real human selves, have any thoughts about how roles have evolved over time here. And
well, one of the things in the chapter, The Debate, Sophie, excuse me, Sophie this actually happened. It's almost precisely what happened. It involves getting in a debate about the role of women in work on public television, but the person who she's debating wouldn't do it unless her husband came. And she said, the other person said, could you bring your husband and then this will all work out? And I said, fine. So at one point, her husband and I said very, very little. But the one thing I did say that we portrayed in the debate was at the end, that I am thankful to the women's movement, to the feminist movement, for bringing child raising to men, because that joy and that involvement with our children has been so profound to me. And I see fathers much different than than growing up. I see fathers totally active in their children. I mean, we have a long way to go. There's no question. We have a long way to go, but we did try to portray some of that progress as things went on. And it really took a head at one point early on in the book in the chapter called The Debate.
And what's interesting, how I'm paying for my dinner. When Sophie and Nick first go out, he doesn't know the lingo. He doesn't know any of the changes in culture, like a woman paying for her own meal. He doesn't know the right language to say. But what Sophie quickly realizes is he really respects women. He really listens to women. He talks about fighting pornography, a one-person battle in the break room at the steel mill where he works. There's a woman who's being battered who he's following her lead and helping her get out. And there are kids playing on the beach. And he clearly is someone who has been around kids and loves kids. And she realized that's what really matters. And, getting beyond the superficial, that the other things are things that he can learn. These are much harder things to cultivate. And so we believe in people's ability to change and grow. And Nick and Sophie both, as you point out, continue to learn and grow throughout the whole book. But we also feel like what Larry just said, that it's not a sacrifice for men to make these changes, that equal relationships, first of all, bring so much joy, particularly around children, but also that the quality of the relationship is so much better when people, are sharing things and really have each other's back.
Yeah. And, we see that in the movement for paid family and medical leave too, that, for example, when both parents take time after the birth of a child, there's actually lingering effects for both the children and the parents in terms of like equitable division of caregiving labor for the new child going forward, even after the leave is over. So yeah, it's not just about us having aspirational hopes for more egalitarian relationships at home, but actually putting in the structures that allow, for example, men to be the fathers that they want to be and get involved early and often, and throughout the kid's life.
There's a great moment in the debate, and this, of course, actually happened, where the older kid at the time is 5, and they're waiting for the babysitter to come. And so he asks, why aren't there any boy babysitters? And she says, well, it is true that the majority of babysitters are girls, and that's because the majority of families, dads don't really share in caring for kids, but that's changing, and you can be a babysitter when you get old enough. And he says, that's what you and Dad are going to talk about on that show tonight. And she's thinking, yes, my 5-year-old is so advanced. And then when they come home, they can't wait to see what the kids thought. But it turns out that their favorite show, The Greatest American Hero, is on at the same time, and that's what they watch. And the 5-year-old says, but Mom, we watched you during the commercials of the other show. She says, oh, good. What was your favorite thing? And he said, when the words went over your faces at the end. That was really cool. So we wanted to show how kids can understand and still be kids who like to watch the great.
Yeah, that was a really great moment.
And humility has to be a major part of everything that you do.
Especially when kids are involved, but
Yes,
also as
right.
an activist. Activism has to make you humble sometimes. Well, one other big movement that's represented in the book is union organizing and union busting. And, I feel like we're seeing this real resurgence of the labor movement right now. Feels really good to see formerly not very highly organized sectors like retail and fast food come into the union movement. So places like Amazon and Starbucks and McDonald's. And what do you see are the key lessons from the book about union organizing or union busting?
Let me just add one thing to Jennifer, to what you're saying, but we've also seen what is an area where there's been a vast majority of work has been women, and that's the teacher unions. There was the rebellion in 2011 in Wisconsin around Scott Walker's attempt to take away the union rights. But then you saw a follow-up with the teachers in West Virginia going on strike, demanding higher pay and more money. And you saw the same thing in another right-to-work state in Oklahoma. You saw this thing going on that's very connected to what has been seen as women's work historically. So I just want, because I always want to make sure I say that. I don't want to forget about that. It's so important to us.
I think some of the lessons there's a chapter called "The Union Makes Us Strong" about a union drive, and I'm really excited that when we go to New York next week, June 8th, one of the worker leaders from the Amazon JFK 8 warehouse, which is the one where the successful union drive went on, is going to be the person in conversation with us. And I said to her, I can't wait for you to read this chapter, especially the organizing that goes on in the bathroom and in people's homes, and the regular day-to-day building relationships and having conversations and listening hard. And because that's what they did. She described to me the techniques that they used and why it was so important. And she got involved. The straw that broke the camel's back for her was this punk kid, college grad who'd never worked in his life and was in charge of her. She's 51, told her she couldn't go to the bathroom. And she said, that's it. And the patient building of relationships, building friendships, building community, that's the key to the kind of organizing that is going to be necessary for us to win. That's what overcomes divisions, is people getting to know each other as people and really having, conversations that need to be had. So we felt like that was one important lesson, but the second one was to point out how much the system is rigged, how much money companies spend on union busting, how much often the laws favor them. And that's why we need systemic change. We really need policy change around like the PRO Act and others to change that power imbalance. And we also need the fight for democracy. We need to make sure that the people who make those decisions live and look like the rest of us and act in our interests and not the interests of big money, which right now is completely, calling the shots. And I use that word intentionally.
I heard that.
We really see in this fight for safety how much a third lesson is that the people like the NRA and other big lobbyists, they want to sow despair. They want us to think that there's nothing we can do, and that it's the country, all of us, that is a problem, rather than the role of money, the role of big corporations, doing profits over people, including profits made from the sale of assault weapons to 18-year-olds on their birthday.
Yeah, thank you. We only have a couple more minutes, so just wanted to see if you had other observations about the process of writing a book, if it's or story from your book tour so far. I know it's ongoing because Ellen has a to-do list every day for Larry as well.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think several things. One is that we're delighted that the people we wanted to center are as inspiring to our readers as they are to us. We're delighted that people are appreciative of what it means to normalize organizing as a way of life, and that we hope this book will encourage more activism. We're proud that people think it's a great story, as well as an important one. And a number of people, the night in Oakland that we did our book talk was right after the leaked document about the Supreme Court getting ready to tear up and trample our right, women's reproductive health. And the daughter of someone I was staying with, Netzie Firestein, some of you know her, her daughter was just in despair before the talk. And she called her mother afterwards and she said, that was just what I needed, because it gave me back perspective that we can build the power to change this. That's what our most important lesson is, I think.
Thanks.
Also, I just wanted to add that the very last chapter, it's called The Roar of the Elders. This is a chapter that we really hadn't talked about till the book was nearly finished. And Ellen said, I really need to include the issue of ageism and the need for elders. I guess you would call us elders. I don't know if they're old enough to be elders yet, but that it's an important, just as we talk about children and young people and leadership and all these things, we really also have to take advantage of the work and the experience that people have had. I know when I was in the classroom, I used to bring the grandparents and the great-grandparents of my students in the class, and it always worked to talk about. They would talk about the old days and the old times. There would be people that grew up in the South during Jim Crow that would talk about what it was like, but also people would talk about what it meant to be an industrial worker in Milwaukee, and how people were able to buy homes and send their kids to college. I mean, it's very important that we ended up the book with The Roar of the Elders.
Yeah, I love this overall message that, relationships and relationship building and collective action are the way that we can make change. And you're right. This is a book that we need right now because people need hope. And so I am going to close with thank you to Larry and thank you to Ellen for bringing the book into the world, and also for being here to talk about it tonight. And also with an encouragement for folks to get it and read it. It is a great reminder that we can make a difference together. And sometimes we mess up, and sometimes it's hard, and sometimes we misunderstand each other. And those are all real bumps in the road, but they can't stop us if we really believe that we want to build those relationships across age, across race, across class, across position, across neighborhoods, and move forward together. So thank you so much.
And I hope that we've helped something I think Family Values at Work does so well, which is to remind people of the nation we deserve and need, and the possibility of getting there together.
Yeah, such a core piece of hope. Thank you so much.
Thanks so
Thank you,
much.
Ellen. Thank you, Larry. Thanks, everybody, for being here.
Thank you.
And do read the book.
Great to see you. Take good care.
Thanks.
Good night.